Well, hello, and I'm really excited to be here today. These are not supposed to be super formal presentation today, but I wanted to put some notes together to remind myself some key topics I wanted to touch on, and I'm recording this right now because I have 8 students on my research team who are going to their very first national conference on November 8th. And so I thought, what perfect timing for visiting you all so that I could share those same ideas with my students. And this is normally our lab group meeting time. So they're all like, yes, we get a little bit of a break, but they'll get to watch this recording later. So again, it's great to be invited to be here with all of you. Troy was in my lab for a semester. Carly Eastep-Cook was an LSAMP scholar. She's in my lab currently, and she's the reason I was running in late. We were trying to finish up a research meeting together, so she's now a master's student in my lab. So these are just a collection of notes that I've been thinking about, of topics, and I also brainstormed earlier today with students who had been to a conference and who had not been to a conference on what kind of questions and concerns they have. You all might have some questions, and I'm very open to answering those later, but there's a couple of things from the discussions with other students that I wanted to go over in particular. So what is a conference? This is a definition that Google comes up with: a formal meeting for discussion. And so I think that's a really important piece, that discussion part. So if you wanted to just read about someone's work, you could look at their papers, you could look at their websites, you could look at a news article, but you can actually go there and see the author of this work and have a conversation with them. And so that's why we pay all this money to go to those venues, so that you can have a face-to-face dialogue with each other. And so to go all that way and then to only hang out with your OSU crew means you're not having the discussion with those people that you wouldn't normally have access to. You might have great memories you make with your friends. Oh, I see Aaron too. Hi, Aaron. I didn't see you a minute ago. That's basically where he sat in my class too, in the same classroom. So you want to be able to discuss with people that you don't normally get to interact with. And so it's great to make some, maybe do some sightseeing with the other people that come from OSU, or friends from high school or other college opportunities that you've met that are there, but then to meet people that you didn't already know before you got there. That's a really important part about conferences. And so that discussion is something that can't happen as easily by email or by just reading someone's paper, those conversations you have. Conferences can take a lot of different forms. They could be really, really big, and some of those are a little bit intimidating. So the SACNAS meeting has thousands of people there. Thousands of fantastic scholars of color are there, so it's an exciting community environment and awesome to be at, but there's just a lot going on. And so to know that you might have people doing geosciences to chemistry to biology, and there might be very, very diverse science represented, and how to even know which things to go to. So to know which particular conference you're going to, how many people are going to be there, really helps inform how you plan and approach that conference. And so these are just a few snapshots of big venues where there's like one person on the stage and many, many people in an audience. That's not very good for discussion. That's one person getting to share all of his or her ideas. But I would encourage you that when you do see you're in a venue like this where there's one big speaker, don't be afraid to ask the questions afterwards. The conference I just came back from on Friday, they encouraged high school students and undergraduate students to be the first ones in line at the microphone to ask a question. A best practice when you ask those questions is you go up to the microphone so that everyone in the venue can hear your question, and you introduce yourself. I'm Ashley Ford Versipt. I'm an assistant professor at Oklahoma State. Or you can say I'm an undergraduate student studying chemistry or biology, and what your name is. Then they have a little bit of context to who you are, and then you ask your question. It also brings prestige to Oklahoma State, that people know, oh, Oklahoma State University students have a question, and they don't think anything bad of you for having a question. It's actually thinking very positively about you if you have the courage to ask a question, and you have the insight of thinking how this might apply to some problem you're interested in, or you really are trying to understand better what the presenter said. So it's really good to ask questions. I also wanted to mention this is more of a smaller conference. Some meetings you might go to might have where everyone who's at the whole conference might take a group photo at the end. And so I'll explain some of the different terminology you'll hear as you hear conference. So conference is the word I've just mentioned. Symposium, that could be just another word for conference. It might be a little bit smaller, It might be a day-long thing here, locally or regionally. So the biochemistry graduate students have a symposium. It's upstairs here in the NRC. They have a poster session out here. LSAMP Scholar Day, there's a symposium. It's a showcase of research. It's like a conference, but it may not have as many external people, or it might be kind of regional. So you have to kind of, these mean sometimes the same thing, sometimes some small variations. Might be called a research retreat or a research day. Oklahoma Research Day is an example of that it's a poster showcase. There's maybe 1 or 2 external people presenting as like a keynote, but they're not as many oral presentations. So that's a different kind of venue. Convention might also be in this word, but convention is often used if it's something like Star Trek convention or board game convention. It's often if it's kind of fun or hobby rather than scientific. But sometimes you'll hear that if it's more of an industrial trade show, they might call it a convention. So you'll hear that terminology sometimes too. Colloquium, if people get very fancy. I think our physics department here calls their seminars colloquium or colloquia. So that word is kind of a synonym. Professional Society Annual Meeting, that's what we call ours. So we had the Biomedical Engineering Society Annual Meeting, which is where about 10,000 people come together to talk about all aspects of biomedical engineering. The American Institute of Chemical Engineers is the one that my students are going to, the annual meeting in November, which has undergraduate students, graduates, professors, industry, national labs, anyone who's interested. And actually it says annual meeting for this national society, but it's actually an international meeting. So for the professional societies or for the SHEP and SUCNES and others, NSBE, those professional societies having an annual meeting may be much larger. Student conference, so with AICHE, there's a weekend early that's focused on undergraduate students. So it's part of the main conference, but it's focused for undergraduate programming first. So you might see student conference, you might also see regional conference. A regional conference might be Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, might include Texas, maybe Nebraska, Missouri, but it's gonna be a little bit smaller, and you get to know more people that are in a similar university or similar type of environment as you. This is a picture of what's called a Gordon Conference. A Gordon Conference is this style of very close, very few people. You might also call it a workshop. And typically they're on a very special topic, and they bring people from around the world to this special topic. And they're encouraged everyone to stay in the same dormitory or at a hotel resort and all be at that same place the whole time. And so it's a small meeting like that Gordon Conference is. They may encourage you to eat meals together. So if you're staying in dormitories, you may have breakfast, lunch, and dinner all on site. There may not be any mall nearby to go eat at or any food court or it might be very remote, kind of isolated where everybody's at this retreat center together. And so at those meals, go sit next to strangers, because they're all there at the same conference who have some similar topic, and they might be lonely too and want to meet somebody new. And so these conferences, the best advice I ever had was to go sit in that seat, that 18, right between these two people. Go sit right there. Say, hi, want to be near the front? What's your name? I'm from Oklahoma State. Just introduce yourself. To me, that paid off. So in 2013, I went to a conference, 2012, went to a conference. I saw a woman that I had seen at multiple presentations in the same area of research over this big national meeting. I said, oh, I've recognized you. Can I sit next to you? Turns out we both had similar backgrounds. We both became professors in chemical and biomedical engineering. She is a year ahead of me on the faculty tenure track. I asked her so many questions. She just came to OSU about a month ago and gave a seminar. And so we have become so good friends. We have such similar research interests, but we met at a math conference in 2012 just because I said hello. We would have met each other later, but it was much more friendship related because we met so early on versus, oh, it's formal, I kind of know who you are, but instead building this friendship. So the small conferences, the point is that it's very easy to get to know a lot of the people there and to really be open with your conversations versus it's a big meeting, I don't know where to start. So those are great meetings if you can go to some small ones. They may also call them a summer school or a summer workshop, or a workshop on a special topic might be kind of small too. Small, I mean under 500, maybe more like 100 people. So those are have different purposes. So what am I supposed to do and where do I go? And there's a lot of terminology here. So I'm going to show you with the schedule of events for the Biomedical Engineering Society conference that just ended and kind of how you can navigate that. Most of you have heard about posters, poster times. They may be mentioned on the agenda as a poster session. Other presentations may be called oral or podium or platform. That all just means someone standing and everyone else listening to them. People might say, are you giving a paper? That's generally a phrase to say you're giving an oral presentation, that you might have written up some document in advance, but you're not reading that paper. No one is going to read verbatim a paper out loud. That's not the way it goes. PowerPoint or some other visual media is what's generally the standard in our in science and engineering, at least. Most require you give an abstract, though, a brief, sometimes as few as 50 words, sometimes as many as 2 pages, abstract, summarize what you're going to talk about. And so usually those are used to screen your application. Do you have something actually that you plan to talk about? And they'll review it and give you some feedback of yes or no, or it might be more detailed feedback. A conference paper might be a more peer-reviewed version, a longer version. Some fields don't have peer-reviewed conference papers, some do, and that would be a question with a research mentor about whether in your field, if you can get a publication out of presenting at a conference. That's very field-specific. In computer science, conference papers are the main publication for their field. In chemical engineering, they're less common. Petroleum engineering, they're very common and very important. Controls, very important. Biomedical engineering, not so much. Panel, that's usually multiple people talking and you can ask them questions. So it's a good Q&A time. A track, that's what's listed here, shown here by the different colors, and I'll show you the more in-depth example in a minute. So a track, we'll discuss that. Keynote and plenary may mean kind of similar things. This is somebody who's like the big person in an area who gets like a little bit more time and maybe more prestigious. They may be older, they may be more accomplished. And so if you can meet that person after their talk, that's a great opportunity to meet a very senior person. It's an honor as a speaker when people come up to you afterwards. So don't feel intimidated. Oh, this is a fancy person, I can't talk to them. People talk to them afterwards, they're gonna be more likely to remember them. Even if you don't really have a lot to say, but I enjoyed your talk, I wanna introduce myself. I'm Ashley from Oklahoma State. That was really meaningful what you said. I really liked that study you showed. That's great. That doesn't have to be a life-changing moment, but it's courage that it takes you to go up and introduce yourself to them afterwards. There may also, we'll look at some receptions or luncheons and banquets, those kind of terms. Sometimes they're more for if they're recognizing some award recipients, and they might be like a $100 banquet. You as a student probably don't want to pay for a $100 banquet, so you can see in your field if that's the expectation to go. But a luncheon might be like, pay $10 and you get to have a nice meal, you get a speaker, and you might get to meet the other scientists and engineers in the room, and the luncheon might be worth paying the extra money for. And I'll also highlight, BMES in particular has an event called Perfecting First-Time Student and Early Career Attendees Experience. This is early in the conference. This is a 1-hour thing that's just for people who've never been to this meeting before, such as yourself. If you've never been there before and you don't know what to do, they're bringing in a room full of people who've never been there. And you might be the only one from your university there, but guess what? So are the other people in the room. So you've instantly got a group of people you can say, hey, I've never done this before. Do you want to go to this next event that sounds fun with me? And then you have some buddies that all are in the same boat as you. And so that's a really awesome meeting activity that if they have that at the conference you're going to, that's really fun to do that, to meet those other first-time people and get a good feel for what that conference looks like. So I'll show you now what this looks like for BMES, the actual schedule, not just that version. So there's some stuff that's not necessarily very relevant to you, and I actually want to do my screen sharing, to not extend the screen, but just duplicate. Okay, so that my video capture can see the same thing that you guys see. So on the schedule of events, and I'll make this larger, they had a track here that was yellow that was kind of for everybody, right? So everybody could come to the welcome reception that was 5:30 to 7:30 the first day. Everyone was welcome to come to the LGBT and Friends Dessert Social, but it did have a $10 ticket price so that you were getting some maybe beer if you were of age and some snacks. And it was a great networking opportunity. And they had a speaker who was a local state representative from Pennsylvania. And then they had different colors representing different things. And you can't quite see all the colors, but the orange was kind of like, these are planning committees. And if you're not on that committee, you're not really, it's not of interest to you. But everybody could go to the platform sessions. So those were the oral presentations. And it says 20 concurrent sessions. We would call those tracks, 20 things in parallel that might have something in common, but you might want to go to an entire track. So in this meeting, one was on biomechanics. Another one was on computational techniques. I could mix and match which ones I wanted to go to, but I do computational work. So I looked mostly at the computational track, and then I looked at some of my special application areas I might be interested in. But I couldn't go to all of them because you can't go to 20 things in parallel at the same time. They're all happening between 8 and 9:30, 20 different events at the same time. So they had a separate schedule that described which particular sessions were there. They had some things that were geared towards undergraduates. They were highlighted in one color. They had some things for high school students in another color. And so the color scheme may help, or there might be stuff about industry-focused areas or academic-focused areas. And so you can kind of see for a particular conference what their emphases are. This particular meeting said posters was from 9:30 to 5 every day. They would have about 1,000 posters at the same time. 1,000 is a lot for anybody to get to, but they organized them by topic area. They said, okay, here's all the computational ones. This is the first 30. So if you had computational interests, you might go to the first 30. If you were very interested in the lung, they had a lung section. And so you kind of go by your topic area, and that could help you hone in on which ones to look. But you couldn't make it to all 1,000 of them. Even if you could, the people were only supposed to be in front of their posters for 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes later in the afternoon. So each meeting might have a different format for how they're doing posters. Something like Oklahoma Research Day, they want you there, like half of the students there for the first half and half of the students for the second half. So a conference best practice is if you're not giving a poster, go to those poster sessions and interact with the people who are doing things that are of interest to you so that when you are giving a poster, they'll return the favor and be at your poster session and checking it out, right? So you want to be able to be both an audience member and a presenter at different times in your conferences. This particular conference does a really good job of celebrating diversity. And so I mentioned the LGBT social the first night. The next day, there's a lunch, the celebration of minorities in BME, and everyone's welcome as long as they buy a lunch ticket, which again is about $10. They had Marta Villarraga, who was a biomedical engineer at Exponent, and so she talked about her career. She talked about having grown up in Colombia and then coming to study at Tulane, about how she got to her job, about the different things she does in her work. And then we got to meet the other people at our tables. We also, the next day, they had a lunch that was geared toward women. They have a professor who was presenting at that, and she recognized, she welcomed the men that were in the room as well, so you didn't have to just be a member of those groups that were celebrated at that particular lunch or event. So there's a lot of things here, but the colors kind of help. So they say like yellow is special events, students kind of light yellow, exhibits when the poster sessions are open or expo hall. So that can help you orient yourself for a big conference. A small conference might have what we call a single track, just one set of things going on. So you're probably going to go to most of those things if it's a small conference. So I think I've mentioned those. Oh, reception. So some will have open receptions. They might be for a university. Just know that most of those, if they're on a published agenda, you're welcome to go. So at AICG, University of Illinois has a reception. I went to Illinois. But if you didn't go to Illinois, you're welcome to be there. You don't have to have an affiliation with that university to go to that reception. If it's a special ticket event that's off-site and you have to have an invitation, then that's different. But if it's on the agenda and it's publicly displayed, you are welcome to be there. What's the purpose of that? As a first-year grad student, we generally thought it was free beer and some food. But now I see that it's mostly if you're interested in going to that school, you can meet some of the faculty and other students in that university. If you're interested in maybe doing a postdoc with someone there, or you're looking for a faculty job, it's that people are there in that room. This year at AICG, Oklahoma State's hosting a reception. We are going to be showing off the success in our Chemie department. So any student that's there, Aaron, you're welcome to be there. My students, I will encourage them to be there. The faculty are going to be showing off. We're going to have a video slideshow about cool things that have been happening at Oklahoma State. We're going to be welcoming anybody that comes in the door, making sure they interface with at least one person from Oklahoma State. We're paying few $1,000s to pay for their food and booze for like an hour, so we want them to have a good impression of about Oklahoma State. And if they're looking for faculty positions, that they get to talk to us. If they're looking for graduate school, they get a great experience. So at these big meetings, there may be receptions like that that'll help you meet and discuss with specific people. When I mentioned to other students earlier today about what they thought of a conference, they thought, how do I get around this big thing? It might be a lot of people, but then they also said they might feel a little insecure about presenting, and they might feel like an imposter. All right, so this is a very common challenge in science and engineering, that a lot of us feel like, okay, someday they're going to find out we do not deserve to be here, that I am here by an accident, or I just got lucky, and oh my gosh, they're going to find me out. It's not true. You all earned and worked hard to be here, and this is true for all of us. And they've even studied, like I did a postdoc at MIT for 2 years, and people there were like, everybody outside thinks they deserve to be there, but everybody there is like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. So there's this book and this thing called imposter syndrome. So there's a website about imposter syndrome. It's the idea that you are successful people, but you don't think that necessarily that you're supposed to be there. So how to deal with it and how to thrive. And so I'll just point you to, I'm not going to show you the whole video now, but I'll point you to her work. So Valerie Young has done a lot of analysis of successful individuals across research and industry and other kinds of career paths, and has done a lot of the psychology study of what they're thinking and what they're doing, and on her website has a number of tips for acknowledging, okay, yeah, I have to deal with these thoughts in my head that think I'm not good enough, but if you got that poster presentation accepted, if you get to give that oral presentation, fake it till you make it, right? So get up there and present it. You may not be the world's expert in it, but you know what? You did that research project. You know what you did. So if your abstract was accepted, present it. And if you don't know the answer to a question someone asks, that's okay. Say, I don't know about that. I haven't thought about that. I'll make sure to talk about that with my research advisor. That's something we can think about in the future. It's okay to not know the answer. They're not going to say, oh, kick you out of the university because you gave a bad presentation because you were nervous. It's really better if people, if they see you really nervous, they're like rooting for you. Like, please, you can do it. You can do it. Like, calm down. You can do it. So people are very much rooting for you. I won't go into all of this, but I have some resources here that I want to highlight. So Nancy Duarte is a really excellent coach for public speaking. She does a lot of help with the people who do TED Talks, and her 2 books are fantastic. They're helping you think about how to tell a story. So Resonate is about the ideas of what in a story helps people remember. So if you're going to give a public presentation, not necessarily in science, but that you want to communicate with people publicly, it's really great. And it looks at case studies of like Martin Luther King's presentations and John F. Kennedy's presentations and other very remarkable speeches of the past, and is really well done and helps you think about public speaking in a really nice way. And it doesn't advocate having a lot of fancy slides or anything. Her book Slideology thinks about how we visually communicate and don't just use the PowerPoint demo templates or some weird PowerPoint slide style that you think looks cute. So it's very clever on that. These other 2 by Gar Reynolds are more about his naked presenter presentations, and they're sort of provocative titles, but the idea that you could tell a story without having a lot of bullets behind you, and you don't have to have a lot of animations and fancy slides. Maybe for your research you need to be able to show the evidence about what your study has done, and you might need to show some terminology for people, but you can tell a story not necessarily with having every word written down on the screen. And so they're helpful kind of thought processes. The one I will highly recommend for scientific research is called The Craft of Scientific Presentations. And they have a great website that has some sample PowerPoint slides that you can download, and you can insert your own content in them. So they're nicely formatted with big title areas, and the main idea is that if you tell people what you're claiming at the top, what your assertion is, like a sentence, this slide is about I have studied this and here the effect means this, and then you show evidence, some picture or some data that communicates what that assertion means. If you can't come up with a one-sentence summary for that slide, you don't need that slide. And so it's a really nice way of actually telling a scientific story and articulating your points. So I'll just point you to those resources. They're fantastic. Networking. So you hear about networking. Okay, we want to go to the conference. It's okay to meet the person next to you. Maybe I can be brave enough to do that. Maybe I can be brave enough to ask a question, but who do I know afterwards and what does it mean for my life? And I got to network, right? It's such a crazy word and it sounds like so intimidating. And it can be. You go into a room and everyone seems to know people and everybody's got a drink and everybody's, or maybe you don't drink. Maybe you have a dietary restriction. You don't eat any of the food there. But most of them will have at least some water or maybe a coffee or something else you can have, or soda. It depends on what your restrictions are or what you're interested in. And if you're really like interviewing and stuff, even if you do drink, you might want to go water or Coke or something so that you're not inebriated if you're trying to impress people. So just keep that in mind. But there's probably someone in the room who's also alone and going, oh my gosh, I'm nervous. What do I do? That's a great person to go talk to and say, hey, I noticed you were by yourself and I'm also by myself. Do you know anyone in this room? And have a conversation with that person. To me, that's been helpful. To also then, if you notice somebody that you saw earlier in the day. So I went to this conference last week and I've done this a long time. But I still was kind of nervous. I walked in one room and I don't really know anybody in any of these rooms. I know people at this conference, but I'm not seeing them. Where are they? Where are my friends? And a woman walked up to me and said, you were at the poster across from me. I'm a first-year grad student, but I saw you at the poster session. But we were kind of diagonally across from each other, maybe like 15 feet away, so it wasn't really natural to just talk a bunch, and we had a lot of visitors at our poster. So we didn't get to talk then. But she said, do you know anyone at my school? And I said, oh, I would like to, but I don't know anybody in the room. I don't even know who's from your school and who's just visitors like eating some snacks. And so she said, well, that's that professor, and told me a little bit about him and her and him and her. And I said, oh, I know his name. I didn't know that was his face or that he was even at your school. But then she introduced me, said, oh, professor, he knew her because she's a first-year student. And then I could tell him how we'd exchanged emails, but I'd never met him in person. And so that kind of thing was really helpful. And so that was a graduate student who reached out to me, seeing that I was alone and being inclusive and welcoming me to her university. And so that was very meaningful. I'm going to think very highly of that student the rest of my career and tell my students to be like her. So the idea with networking is really just making friends, that you're not necessarily oh, I'm gonna meet the top person, the president of the society, and I'm gonna get him to do special favors for me. No, you're gonna meet someone, you're gonna learn about their area, and you may, and also your classmates, the people in this room right now are part of your network, people that you had in class before, professors, all part of your network. But you're not just getting benefits from them. You might be able to tell them something, or you might be able to at least make their day by telling them that you liked what you heard earlier that day. But you're helping others in your network. So if you think of ideas, you go, oh my gosh, that reminds me of so-and-so. Let me send them an email and say, I just met this new person, and connect them back. And so that interaction part's really important. So you make other people feel like the most special person in the room by interacting with that. And you want them to feel great about their interaction with you. So you're listening to them. You're being sincere in compliments. If you're like, oh, this is not working out, well, it's okay to move on, right? But if you do have something you liked about your interaction, compliment them. You can ask for help if you're like, I would like to meet someone else in this room, or I've been looking for so-and-so, can you point them out to me? Or I'm new to this, help me. They will do that. I will also say by following up after the conference is when you remember people, especially if it was a smaller meeting and you have a roster of everybody that was there, you can connect with them on LinkedIn. That's going to be helpful for when you go to the next conference, you say, who am I supposed to know in this field? And you can refresh your LinkedIn list and remind. But don't just necessarily follow random strangers on LinkedIn, but on Twitter, you can totally follow the random strangers. People you thought were cool at this conference are like, wow, this keynote speaker is awesome. And you tweet about them and you tag them in it, then they're going to reshare it and they're going to be then following you. And so that's a really nice part of the social network. So you can ask for help. So with all of this, to know which conference you're actually going to. So I would say your research mentor and your research team, your supervisors, are great to ask about what should I expect at this meeting? Is this huge? Or is this like 50 people? Is this mostly undergrads, mostly graduate students? Is this a spectrum? So my students are going to a small diabetes conference later in November, and it's mostly going to be clinical people doing all kinds of diabetes, and my students do chemical engineering computer models for how diabetes damages the kidney, so it's very focused. But I wanted them to see about how the disease affects patients. And so it's going to be okay if they don't win the poster session, because nobody in the room may know any of their keywords. But if they can learn something about somebody else's perspective when they have poster discussions, that's going to be an advantage for our team. And so you can also ask peers, particularly other LSAMP scholars who went to this meeting last year. What was that like? Did you like it? I also asked my students when they come back. Last year was the first time any of my students went to research day. And I said, was it worth it? Did you like it? And they said, yeah, this is a really good one. I want to come back. You should send students from the lab here to this particular conference. So I'm going to send people. Some of the others, if they say, no, it's not really that good, or it's okay because it's here, then I may send them here again. But if it's I have to pay a lot, I might not do it. So some other discussion points. So these were the things I brainstormed with students. Overwhelming, deciding where to go, I kind of covered that. Imposter syndrome. Diversity, if there's specific events that allow you to meet other people that you identify with, that could be very positive. Some conferences still have the fatal flaw that they may invite all their plenary or keynote speakers. You look and you're like, oh, this is all white men. What's going on here? But a lot of speakers are saying, no, I'm not going to be on a panel or on a speaker list that's all white men. Even if they are white men, they're saying, where are the scientists of color? Where are the women? Why don't we have them represented? And so there's been a lot of recent push on social media to be more inclusive in the set of speakers that are highlighted. And so that a lot of us are taking a very active stand in that. I mentioned making research friends, a community, people who are working in a similar area. Like, you're going to have similar things you're going through, that those friends at different universities provide another perspective. A student I was talking about today, she said, for the love of God, if you can tell them anything, do not wear heels. So that was her one piece of advice for all of you. And then my male student said, I'm wearing shoes that are flat, and I've been standing for a few hours. I wish I had arch support. I wish I had my running shoes on. And so even then, it's totally fine. If you're going to be at a poster, wear the most comfortable shoes that you can get away with the outfit you're wearing, right? Maybe not your Peg house shoes, but the most comfortable thing you possibly can that works with your outfit. But if that means wearing a little more casual outfit, go for it. Also, to know what the norm is in your field for what to wear. So math conferences, they wear shorts, socks, and sandals. It is really casual and really like, well, this is the 90s. Versus some other meetings, it might be standard that everyone's wearing a suit and tie. So you would need to know, ask people who've been there before, or ask your supervisors what the expectation is in your field. I wear this a lot to conferences. Cute dress that's kind of nerdy. I get some conversations. It's got computer science code on it. I talk about modeling that we do. So people are like, wait, that's computer code. And they freak out. I'm like, yeah, okay, I've got this other one with infinity scarves on, or infinity symbols on it. And so then I can really geek out with my people. Right? If I know that it's not going to be a nerdy environment as much, but most of science is, I might just wear a blouse and slacks and be very comfortable, depending on the weather, right? Know that in conference venues, it's often pretty chilly because there's a lot of people in there, so they turn the AC way down. So men might want to wear a jacket that goes, like a suit jacket or a blazer, just because it's cold in there. Women, having a cardigan or a sweater or pullover that works with your outfit is generally very good because you're going to be generally pretty cold. But you can take it off if you need to, if it gets warmer in there. If you find you're better presenting without those extra sleeves on, you can totally do that. I would say the average conference, men are wearing button-down shirts, maybe with a tie, maybe without, and at least some slacks. And women, as a default, slacks and some cute blouse. Right? Doesn't have to be super fancy, might go a little bit more formal or a little bit less more casual, but if you're there at that medium level, you would never be out of place. And so you don't have to go buy a suit for the first conference. Maybe if you're on the job market, it's a little bit more important, but not critical. So just find out from your field what's the expectation. If it's a conference here on campus, maybe a polo shirt is even totally appropriate, but probably not athletic shorts. All right, so there's a certain norm, but it doesn't have to be super fancy. It does not have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. I also, just the last thing I wanted to show was this link about how to crush your first conference. And so I just want to open that up. This is random, Foundation for Economic Education. But it had a few talking points. So the dressing smart, oh, you can't see this, sorry. When it switches to presentation mode, it takes it off of the duplicate screen. Okay, so I mentioned the dressing. Planning out your days. So the conference might be scheduled from 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. until as late as 10 or 11 p.m. You'll be really tired, really hungry, especially if you need to present, if you need to be interviewing, if you need to do a poster in that. So you need to think about your personal health, about you might be shaking a lot of people's hands. You might have been traveling in an airport. So if hand sanitizer is your jam, bring that with you. If you know you tend to get really excited and talk a lot and wear out your voice, that you might need to not stay up late the night before and chat with everyone or go out and do whatever you do when you go out. You might need to go home early, get some sleep or practice your slides, drink a lot of water the night before so you're ready and fresh the day you're presenting. After your presentation, you can be more relaxed. If you know you really want to see that key speaker in your area, that he or she might be big name or might be someone just a year ahead of you, that you're really excited about what they've been doing, or it's the person from your lab that's now doing something else, or that you're very interested in a collaborator's work, something like that, make sure you prioritize going to that one. Then after that, you can really think about, well, do I want to see my friends talk? Do I want to see cool areas of science? Figure out your schedule of what things line up for you. But then take a break. Make sure you go eat lunch. Or if you know you're going to have a tight schedule, bring some snacks with you. Sometimes those conferences are at really expensive hotels where the breakfast is not included. And if you know you're a breakfast person and you're not going to be able to pay $15 for breakfast, bring some nuts, bring some snack bars, bring fruit with you, or find out where the CVS. Most cities, there is a CVS within a mile of wherever you're at. You can go get some groceries at the CVS or the Trader Joe's or whatever shop is around and get some snacks in your hotel room so that you can eat and have it with you. And so it's not a bad idea to have a little bit of food with you no matter what you're doing, just in case you miss something and you're able to have that little bit of snack. So planning your days, pacing yourself, being okay with the Q&A session, so practice with your team. I've got one grad student who asks all the hard questions, and people are like, oh my gosh, Steve, you're so hard. He's like, no, but if I ask you the question where I really know in depth the hardest thing possible about your work, then you're gonna be fine when you talk to people who have no idea what you're doing, and they ask you some random question, you've at least thought about the really hard questions already. So find those people on your team who are gonna ask you real questions in practice so that you're prepared later. Opportunities to practice engaging tablers. So some conferences have expos where they have vendors who are telling you about their university, or they're telling you about some cool technology they have or about the books that they sell. Get the freebies, get the cool stuff from that university. At the meeting I was just at, University of Delaware had ice cream from their university. Check it out, see what they've got to offer, right? It doesn't hurt to check those out. So exhibit halls are really cool if they exist at your conference. Some provide some special opportunities. If you're a student and you get involved in leadership, you might be greeting people at the door. You might be handing out programs, but then you get to meet the other volunteers and the other coordinators. So there might be ways like that. Building the conference family. I've gone to the same conference every year since 2007, and I only missed 1 year for hurricane. But now I go to that. I can stand in the coffee shop in whatever hotel it's in, and I will know at least 25% of the people that walk by. Because I've been building that community. There's about 20,000 people that go to this conference. I do not know 20,000 people, but I will in a room be able to spot at least one person I know at any moment at that one conference. Go to BMES, it didn't, that wasn't true. But that conference, that's my community. That's where I have people. I feel like it's homecoming. Like, yes, I get to see all my chemi friends, the people I knew from undergrad, people I knew from grad school, faculty from those places and undergrad classmates, but then people that I met later who are like, oh, I'm an alum from your school. And we met, and actually Professor Ramsey in my department right now, he went to the same grad school as me, but he was older than me. He graduated before I did. He started working at OSU while I was still a grad student. And as a grad student, he said, oh, I'm at Oklahoma State and I'm an Illinois alum. I said, oh, that's great. So then when I applied here, I had already met him. And I knew here's this great person who was a bit ahead of me in my graduate program who loves being at Oklahoma State. So that was really helpful for my recruitment here because I did not go here for undergrad. So conference family, big advocate about that part. Don't be afraid to party somewhat. If there are social events, do them. If you find a group of friends that you want to go out to eat, experience the city, do some sightseeing, do that. Just stay safe. Pay attention to some cities may have a bit more, I'll just say San Francisco is a city I hate for conferences. They have the conference that I go to is usually in a neighborhood where there's a lot of homeless with a lot of mental challenges, and they tend to be very violent. My friends, people have been mugged, people have been hit, people have had other things stolen, and that's the only place I've ever experienced this aggression, right? Like, different cities have different homeless populations, but the one in San Francisco is a very weird situation socially. And so then you need to be thinking about personal safety and not just having your stuff that's easily stolen, and what to do if someone who has a mental illness hits you, right? You don't fight back, but how do you respond? And that's not a normal thing that we have to deal with in Stillwater, Oklahoma, but in San Francisco, where our conference is, it is. And so just being mindful of where you're at and what's safe. But generally, Uber is good to take places, or public transportation, those kind of things. And then this is the last bit, the follow-up list. What are the ideas you had? Circle the ones you're like, I must find their paper, or I really need to email this person, or I need to tell my professor so-and-so said hi, or I need to follow this person on LinkedIn, had a really good conversation. And so all of that follow-up, don't just throw those away. Don't just crumple them up in your suit coat and you never open them again. And if you look at it 6 months from now, you may not be able to recognize your own chicken scratch. But if you follow up immediately, hopefully you'll have good interactions. So with that, conference is a lot of fun, but there's a lot of different venues that you might have. And so again, they're all an opportunity for you to discuss with people and to get some discussion feedback on your work. Maybe not everyone is seeing your publications, or no one has seen your work yet because it's the first time you're giving it, but they can see what you're working on and maybe provide some insights that might influence the future of your work, or some encouragement that encourages the future of your work. So with that, that's all I have prepared. I'm open to questions or conversations that you want to have about conferences, or maybe anything I didn't address that you all think of. So, questions? I want a conversation. Yes.
Where would you put a summit, I guess? Where would a summit with the conferences? What would a summit be?
So people can use phrases to mean lots of different things. So have you been to a meeting that was called a summit?
Not yet. Well, I will be this coming up weekend, so that's gonna.
Okay. Do you know what on the announcement for it, it described itself as? Or do you know what it's called?
It's the Forbes 30 Under 30 Summit.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that.
That's why I was kind of confused, because I know you were talking about it. I was like, you know what?
If I can say a little bit about that. So there's different types of summits, and I'm sure that you're probably going to look at some stuff. But so kind of like this, the ones that I've been to are a small portion that's specific for a particular community within a larger conference. Mm-hmm. So specifically, and this is just because that's the experience I know, is now it's called Unidos US. Yeah. So there's a leadership summit for college undergrads and grad students, but it's held within the actual NCLR conference or Unidos conference. So that summit is actually an individual one. Now, in this case, I don't know if it'll be the same. So during those summits, there's not breakout sessions, there's general sessions. So every single person goes to every single session, if that makes sense. So because they're smaller communities, then everybody's able to go to those different topics versus breakout sessions for different groups. Now, I don't know if this particular one is going to be the same way, but that's kind of a tendency that I've seen, at least for those summits that I've attended. So
thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Yeah. Who has been to a conference? Okay.
Wait, has or hasn't?
Has.
Okay.
Okay. Who has been to a big conference? few. Who's been to more of an undergraduate focused opportunities? Okay, yeah. Anybody been to one of those really small ones where you get to know a lot of the people there? Not yet. Those are kind of fun, but yeah, they kind of specialize. So, other questions?
So if I can add a little bit more, and if you can chime in on this too. So some of the recommendations I give scholars, so how many of you, and I already asked some of you this earlier, but still, how many of you have business cards? You can raise your hand. Just a few. Okay. So the rest of you should get business cards. OSU actually has, if you go onto their career services, hireosu.com website or whatever it's called, you can actually order them. They're, if I'm not mistaken, they're $5 for 250 business cards. And it'll have your name, your major. Does anybody, because I'm guessing some of you have those, can you put any affiliations like programming or anything like that? No, it's just your major? Okay, an address. So, or not address, but email probably. So, but still it's a good habit to have, is to have those with you on conferences. It looks, especially undergrads, a lot of, when you're meeting faculty, a lot of faculty don't expect you to have a business card, but if you do, they're severely impressed, like super impressed.
Yeah. With your business cards, you can put them in your name tag. So when people ask you stuff, you're like, oh, I've got my card right here. And it's easy access. And you also can put your, if you had any tickets for lunches or your hotel room key, stuff like that, that you know you didn't want to lose, but you don't want to carry around a purse or a bulky wallet, you can put them in your name tag, which you should have at all your events anyway. So that's kind of a secret trick.
Another tip in regards to business cards is if you get a business card from someone at the conference, the same thing, you can leave it there. But one big tip that I learned when I was in graduate school is that as soon as you finish talking to that person, make sure on the back of it, and many of them now are starting to put stuff in the back, but if find a space within the business card that puts something that you will remember them by. Because many times you'll be like, oh, I was super impressed by this person there, and I want to reach out to them, but you don't remember which one is which because you have so many business cards. So you could say the lady in the red dress or whatever that spoke to me about, I don't know, nanotechnology. So anything that will make you remember them, that's significant. It could be anything physical, it could be anything about your conversation, but make sure to put that there. Now, another, you want to add anything to that?
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another little tidbit to that, though, to take it to the next level, and many of us, including myself, unfortunately forget about this. When you get those business cards, they're not collectible items. Don't keep them as trading baseball cards. Make sure to reach out to them. Even if it's to say, hey, you know what? It was awesome to meet you. Period. Not that you necessarily want to go to grad school, I mean to that particular program or whatever. If you do have questions to ask, think of these people as potential mentors too. You never know what connection you're going to have with them. And if you had a great conversation with you, they might be able to give you advice that you never even thought of. So make sure to do that. Reach out. I'm trying to get better at that. And I actually, when we went to an international conference with Rainey, I met a gentleman that actually puts the conferences together. And I was like, you know what? I don't really have anything to ask him per se, but he's a great connection. So I made sure that as soon as I came back, I was like, okay, and I kept it, that's another thing, I keep it right in front of my computer to make sure to not forget. And so as soon as I did, I was like, hey, it was great to meet you at the conference. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. Because we ran into each other at a bus stop, and then some other places. And I said, it was great meeting you there, blah, blah, blah. So that way trigger his memory of who I was. And the cool thing was that he actually replied, he's like, I remember you perfectly, you did an amazing job, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my goodness. So you never know. So make sure to not just keep these business cards, but reach out to them even if you don't have a particular interest in mind. Just say, thank you, it was great meeting you. Maybe I can see you at a conference in the future.
Yeah, and even if another story, there was a speaker at a conference that I went to who told his personal story about, he's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry or physiology, and he talked about how he grew up on a small farm and he'd never met a chemist, and he was kind of the only one very interested in science in his high school. And then he decided to go to university, and was kind of the first in his family to do that. And then he went and got a PhD, and then he was very successful in science, and he's now a Nobel Prize winner, right? So it's a very inspiring career path. I also grew up in a farming town. No one in my family went to college. No one knows what a graduate degree is. And so I didn't get a chance to ask him a question after the conference, and I really didn't have a question, but I was like, wow, thank you for telling your story. So I emailed him. I looked him up and said, you didn't meet me, but I was in the audience, and you telling your story, like, oh, some people have similar backgrounds to me. You know, you look at him and I thought, this is this professor at MIT, he's very successful. What do I have to identify with him? But there were pieces of his story that I could see myself in. Probably not going to be a Nobel Prize winner someday, but I could definitely tell him that his story, by him telling that, then it's not just like, oh, I'm awesome, I'm a Nobel Prize winner. He wasn't that way. He was very humble and told about his life, and he didn't need to tell it in that context, but it was done in a very sincere and nice, good way. And so I sent him an email, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, Nobel Prize winner, email me back. I'm so excited. Like, you know, he made my day by emailing me back and just saying thank you and acknowledging that I exist as a human, right? And he probably gets a lot of emails, but to get a very positive email, like, people are pleased by that. So, and the worst they can do is ignore you. So it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, well, again, thank you. Or any other questions? Yes, you do. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
So is there, when you're like doing research and going to present to conferences, is there like a certain number of conferences you should go to, or like ones, how many like in your particular field that you should look for?
That's a good question. So for the purposes of the recording, the question is how many conferences to go to and for your research. So, and remind me, are you a graduate student or you're an undergrad? Okay, I've seen you before. Were you a SEAT or a Summer Bridge TA? Okay, yep. Okay. I remember you. So it depends a lot, depends on budgets too. So LSAMP is a great opportunity that can make that go further. But typically, what I would say is a great recommended number would be as if you were a graduate student to try to be going to one per year. It could be more if there are certain things in your area that are a special topic and really great fit for your personal work. But I tried to have an abstract every year for our main chemical engineering meeting. That was the community I wanted to be in. I knew I wanted a job in chemical engineering in the future. I would meet my friends. It was my homecoming time, right? I loved the chemical engineering meeting. But sometimes the chemical engineering meeting is very broad. So there's not a lot of people doing a lot of advances in my same research area. And so I might need to go to a special conference. So as faculty, I'm going to more of the special conferences to get known by other people in that application science area, so that then we can think about collaborations or other things, angles I haven't been looking at, and so that I can be better versed in some areas I've moved into recently. I am encouraging all of my undergrads to do everything local they can. So if there are things within a couple hours, we're doing all of those that exist. If none of those exist that year, we're not doing any. But that we're trying to go to at least one public outside venue per student per year at a minimum, if they're actively working on research projects. But we're searching for other opportunities. So one of my students she applied to this math summer school that was about math and medicine, which is what she was doing. And for that conference, they brought like 15 people to some place in Utah. They paid for them to be there. And they said, oh, as a follow-up to this conference, this summer school, we're going to pay for you to go to a math conference in January, just so you know. And so she went to this math conference in January that otherwise we wouldn't have gone to, but they paid for the whole thing. She gave a poster. She also went to a Broadening Horizons kind of leadership group within another meeting that said, we want to focus on underrepresented groups to have more access to this particular society meeting, and we're providing mentorship, we're providing scholarships, you had to apply, but once you were in, there was a track of other scholars, and then they got to also present their work at that conference. And so she got to go to that meeting that I hadn't been to in a while. I did some that were like, we're looking for young women in math, and there's not as many women faculty in mathematics. And so they were purposely trying to bring in people doing certain research topics. It had to be that year's research topic. So if you were doing geometry, you could do this year. If you were doing partial differential equations, which I could go the next year. And so then they had a math bio one, which I'm also mathematical biology, so I could go that year. But I couldn't go every year because I don't do all of the math spaces. So I looked for opportunities. So looking for more, it doesn't hurt to go to more, and it's nice if you can go to more just for the networking part. But I would say average of one per year would be awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you guys. So thank you, Dr. Ford. We really appreciate having you.
Yeah, and if you do have questions in the future, things you think of, I am in chemical engineering. You can find me on our department website, or you can find me on the 4th floor of Engineering North. So very email responsive. So.
Thank you so much. Does